What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that Licorice Pizza is no perfect movie. And Licorice Pizza follows a year in the life of 15-year-old actor turned businessman Gary Valentine, played by Cooper Hoffman, in 1973 as he forms a strong platonic relationship with a mid 20s photographer's assistant named Alana, played by Alana Haim. And the relationship starts to intensify over time as Gary becomes more and more frustrated that because of the age gap, he can't form an actual relationship with her, and she becomes more frustrated with him when she has trouble deciding whether or not to spend more time with him or figure out what to do with her life. And I hadn't actually heard that this movie existed up until some letterboxd reviews popped up in my feed from people who saw it early and absolutely fell in love with it. And I decided to buy into the hype and I closed my eyes during all the trailers. And naturally, for that reason, I didn't know the overall story other than two kids who are in love. I didn't realize there was a significant age gap, so naturally, I didn't understand the controversy until those reviews said, so about the controversy, let me just say this. So, let me just say this. There's nothing fucking creepy about this relationship because from the very first conversation, the two of them point out every chance they get that they're not a couple because it's illegal and it's kind of gross at the exact same time, and they never go into Woody Allen territory where they try to justify it. If anything, whenever there are more risque or quote unquote inappropriate moments like Gary looking at Alana's tits or supposedly having sex with a woman who was closer to his age, those moments are actually kept off screen away from the camera to make it a little bit more ambiguous as to how far the relationship can get. And the mere suggestion of these things is what adds shock value and genuine human drama because the two of them have such great chemistry. You're supposed to feel sad that they can't be a legitimate couple. And speaking of which, the main reason, as everyone's pointed out, to see Licorice Pizza, the main reason I had a huge smile on my face throughout the majority of it were the performances of Cooper Hoffman and Alana Haim. The two of them were pitch perfect individually, but especially as a friendship. They have some of the most natural chemistry I've seen all year. The best compliment I can give to them is that when they're sitting down having a mundane conversation, let alone discussing what they each want to do with their lives, it never feels like the two of them are reading off of a script. For the most part, it feels like you're actually watching two real life people sitting down, shooting the shit, as if no cameras were on them. In fact, Paul Thomas Anderson actually cast Hoffman at the last minute because the other actors that he auditioned just sounded too phony when they tested alongside Haim, and that absolutely makes a ton of sense. Now, one thing I hate with a passion when it comes to romance movies is that whenever the flaws of the relationship start to come into fruition and wreck the couple's chances of being together, those flaws are so stupid, forced, and contrived where it makes no sense why they would break up over the smallest thing that they could have easily talked over or could have at least lived with it like an actual couple. But here, the flaws of the relationship are completely justified, they feel realistic. It revolves around how each of them have certain personal advantages one has over the other, and whenever they advertently or inadvertently flaunt it in front of the other, it creates this mutual sense of jealousy whenever they're not friends. For Gary, it's painfully obvious what the flaws are. He hates the fact that he can't pork Alana, and he gets even more jealous when he sees her checking out other men in opportunities where had she not been friends with Gary, she wouldn't have met these other men. So he feels a little bit entitled to be more than just a friend to her. And naturally, when he doesn't get her way, he lashes out against her or one of the other guys in a more subtle way than a teenager would normally do, but in a damaging enough way regardless. But with Alana, she envies just how charismatic, energetic, and incredibly perseverant Gary is for someone who's only 15, where anything he wants to do in his life, no matter how fucking stupid it sounds, he'll fully commit to it. If he wants to create an arcade, he'll raise the money himself. He'll run out on the streets during rush hour to throw flyers through car windows, pursue every investor he can as charismatic as possible, and he doesn't give up until he accomplishes it. And since most of the opportunities that Alana has achieved over the course of the year are partly based on her partnership with Gary, it worries her that maybe she might not be making enough life decisions for herself. And as a result, she looks for anything she can, like volunteering for this one political campaign, as an excuse to say, I'm doing a noble cause. Meanwhile, Gary's just creating a business to make a quick buck. But nevertheless, she's doing a more noble cause as a means of proving a point, as opposed to genuinely wanting to help others. But as mean-spirited as those flaws sound, the best parts of the movie are just seeing the two of them hanging out, having a good time, and being the best of friends that they can. And you completely understand why there's such a good platonic relationship. At the very beginning, Alana has always been openly cynical and pessimistic towards everything and everyone in her life, but here comes this one kid who is, at his best, polite and loving towards everyone he comes across, even when he doesn't like them. He sees her, notices the frown on her face, and tries to get her to open up because he wants to get to know her regardless of her attitude. And since no one else in her life has ever done that before, something he picks up on based on the fact that she tends to repeat the same sentence twice. He literally points that out in the first scene that they're in. She still feels super appreciative about that and wants to give back towards him. It's just such a... I don't usually get this excited about relationships like this, but it felt genuine. It felt like couples that I've seen in real life. And as for Paul Thomas Anderson's direction, it's something I've always admired in his movies more than enjoyed. I actually got to see The Master on 70mm in Toronto before the first lockdown, and it wasn't until I was riding on the way home that I started to pick up on the gay subtext that was in it, which was clever and subtle, but it still made for a little bit of an unpleasant viewing experience, especially during some of the more slower moments. But for someone known for slow, depressing psychodramas, it was really refreshing to see him so adept at making a lighthearted slice-of-life comedy drama. His trademark camera work is still there, where just like Spielberg, he's able to film everything in a long take, but make it seem like the scene was cut together by staging the camera and the actors in multiple angles in one setting alone. So, for example, this one conversation of Gary and Alana can start off in a wide shot, and then as the conversation becomes more interesting, the camera will zoom in, turn into a close-up, and then to finish it off, it'll pan down at their feet as Gary presses his against Alana. Just through visual cues, you learn everything you can about the characters without even listening to the dialogue, without any exposition needed, because this might be the most expositionless movie I've seen all year, which is really saying something. And as expected, the 1970s is perfectly captured through the practical costume and set design. Everything looks as if it were 1973. The recreations were absolutely outstanding. It had a killer soundtrack that you would of course expect with a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. And dialing back to the camera work, because there was one thing that I forgot to mention, even when it's not a long take, Anderson still picks and chooses which angles to use to tell the story as perfectly as possible by either framing the actors in a two-shot where everyone's in the foreground and background so you're looking back and forth without having to cut back and forth, or filming one shot extended through and over the shoulder of one character to make it feel like you're actually in the setting alongside them. Now, the one problem I did have with Licorice Pizza, like any P.T. Anderson movie, it is a slow burn where some scenes take longer than others. And one thing that I noticed, because I've seen this movie twice, on first viewing, there are moments that take a complete diversion from the relationship to focus more on the questionable and negative aspects of 1970s culture, and sometimes it does play into the relationship. For example, Gary can be rejected for acting roles based on his age, though he wouldn't even know it, whereas Alana is perfect for an audition because she has a Jewish nose. Make what you will of that. But there are other sequences and characters, particularly revolving around John Michael Higgins, who is pretty hit and miss of a comic for me, that those scenes could have been cut and it wouldn't have made a difference. In fact, based on some calls for protests and boycotts over those scenes in particular, Anderson might have been doing himself a favor publicity-wise, even though, towards the people who are protesting this movie, the movie is on your side. Those scenes are in there to point out how ugly and repulsive racism in the 70s was. And if you seriously can't pick up on that, you're a fucking moron. I swear, people are just looking for shit to protest in movies nowadays. But regardless, still, if those scenes were cut, I felt like more time could have been spent on certain side characters from actors who had been built up in the reviews and were still funny. Sean Penn and Tom Waits were hilariously over the top as this actor director duo who, without spoiling anything, tend to live in the world of their movies by reciting their dialogue and coming up with the most bizarre shit you can even imagine. And Bradley Cooper was intensely batshit insane as this one would-be client of Gary's who led to the most hilarious moment in the entire film. All three of these guys were funny and memorable, but I'd be lying if I said that they were in it enough to be as great as the rest of the movie or as the two main characters alone. The only side character who really stands out equally is Benny Safdie as this one real-life politician who, of course, his first impression is a lot better than what he's like in real life, but once you find out certain secrets that he's carrying, it is pretty tragic and you understand why he's keeping them in the first place, but at the same time, there's still a cowardly side to him that refuses to open up because he's too afraid of the negative consequences as opposed to the potential positive changes that could come from it. But in regardless, either way, Licorice Pizza was a fantastic hangout movie with terrific performances, great camera work, a killer soundtrack, and a really good relationship to care about at its core. So for that reason, I'm going to give Licorice Pizza a 4.5 out of 5. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen Licorice Pizza, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews and my upcoming Best of the Year list. And be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.